meditation, we are reading from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 3, verses 1 to 11. Then he turned and went up the road to Bashan, and Og, king of Bashan, came out with all his people to meet us in battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, "Do not fear him, for I have handed him and all his people and his land over to you. And you shall do to him just as you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who lived in Heshbon." So the Lord our God also handed over to us Og, king of Bashan, with all his people, and we struck them until no survivor was left. We captured all his cities at that time, and there was not a city which we did not take from them. 60 cities, all the region of Argob, the king of Og in Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates and bars, besides as many unwalled towns. We utterly destroyed them as we did to Sihon, king of Heshbon, utterly destroying the men, women, and children of every city. But all the animals and the spoils of the cities we took as our plunder. So that at that time we took the land from the hand of the two kings of the Amorites and were beyond the Jordan, and from the valley of Arnon to Mount Hermon. Sidonians called Hermon Sirion, and the Amorites called it Senir. All the cities of the plateau, all Gilead and all Bashan, as far as Salekah and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og in Bashan. For only Og, king of Bashan, was left of the remnants of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. It is in Rabbah of the sons of Ammon. Its length was 9 cubits and its width 4 cubits by the usual cubit. In Genesis 6, we see the description of Nephilim, which means the fallen ones, otherwise called the giants. We read that in verse 4 onwards. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of mankind, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Notice that these giants were there also afterward, which suggests that there were occurrences of cohabitation between sons of God and daughters of men, even after the flood. We see in the book of Numbers, when the spies went to spy out the land of Canaan, they described what they saw in Numbers chapter 13, verse 33. We saw also the Nephilim there. The sons of Anak are part of the Nephilim. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. In the Genesis narrative, where Nephilim are mentioned, we see the multiplying of wickedness beyond measure. It was also the same in the land of Canaan when Israelites came to possess it. God was watching what was going on. In fact, to Abraham, in Genesis chapter 15, he mentioned, "For the wrongdoing of the Amorites is not yet complete." In Deuteronomy 2 and 3, we read about the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan. A description of Og is given, showing his immense size and strength. The size of his bed was around 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. When we study the history of Israel, God had instructed the Israelites how they were to treat their enemies. Regarding cities at a distance from Canaan, if the need to fight against them came up, as here the Lord told them in Deuteronomy 20 verse 10, "When you approach a city to fight against it, you shall offer it terms of peace. And if it agrees to make peace with you and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall become your forced labor and serve you. However, if it does not make peace with you, but makes war against you, then you shall besiege it. When the Lord your God gives it into your hand, you shall strike all the men in it with the edge of the sword. However, the woman, the children, the animals, and everything that is in the city, all of its spoils you shall take as plunder for yourself, and you shall use the spoils of your enemies, which the Lord your God has given you. This is what you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not of the cities of these nations nearby. But regarding the Canaanite cities, God said, only in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance, you shall not leave anything that breathes alive. Instead, you shall utterly destroy them, the Hittite and the Amorite, the Canaanite and the Perizzite, the Hivite and the Jebusite, just as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that they will not teach you to do all the same detestable practices of theirs, which they have done for their gods, by which you would sin against the Lord your God. It was not the usual sins that they were guilty of. God describes them as guilty of detestable practices of theirs, which they have done for their gods. The presence of the giants seems to be linked to these abominable practices, unknown in other nations. Even Edom, the Moabites, and the Ammonites had dispossessed these giants of their land. Though these relatives of Israel were not part of the promise, yet they had not yet crossed the boundary that God had set for man. Israel were not to attack them or dispossess them of their land. We see them centuries later, even when Israel were living in the promised land, when the race of the giants had died out. Let us purify ourselves from all intermixture of the flesh or the world and the devil with our lives that have been sanctified by the Spirit of God. What fellowship is possible between Christ and Belial, or between idols and the living God? Just as the interactions of the sons of God with the daughters of men brought about abnormally large men who were a threat to the world for centuries, our dabbling with evil may create a mass of trouble for the world for years to come. Let us keep to the ways of our blessed God and wear his yoke with joy and meekness, so that we may bring forth holy fruit to God. During our spiritual journey, we see enemies to be subdued and others to be utterly destroyed. Our bodily desires, natural and wholesome as they are often the weak spots that lead us into temptation. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 27, "Instead I subdue my body and make it my slave, so that after preaching to others, I myself will not be disqualified." Even legitimate desires like hunger, thirst, and other bodily needs have to be brought under the lordship of Christ. Yet, there are enemies which are to be utterly destroyed. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 5 onwards, Paul says, "Put to death, therefore, your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry, for which things' sake cometh the wrath of God upon the sons of disobedience, wherein ye also once walked when ye lived in these things. But now do ye also put them all away, anger, wrath, malice, railing, shameful speaking out of you." No matter that Og was a giant, and his towns and cities were high-walled with bars and gates, the Lord had delivered Og into the hands of his people, and neither strength nor gigantic stature could help him. Let us be strong in fighting against the spiritual enemies of our spirit, defiling lusts and passions and corrupting ambition and anger. Since we are in Christ, who has passed through death into new life for our sakes, let us know and normalize the victory of the Lord in our daily lives. God bless.